Hello and welcome to my Floss Tube channel. I'm Jean Farish, and once again I get to spend this time with you, and that is just exactly where I want to be. Today I'm going to do a stitch tutorial. It's been a while since I've done one, and this one's going to be on the herringbone stitch. Probably have mentioned it once or twice in earlier videos, but it's probably time for a little bit of a refresher, and perhaps I can even add something more to the topic than I thought of the first time around. Anyway, herringbone stitch is a very basic surface embroidery stitch that can easily be done as a counted thread stitch. Now keep in mind that the difference between surface embroidery and counted thread is on surface embroidery, although there is an effort made to keep a consistent size in your stitches, that is simply done by kind of eyeballing it. Whereas with counted thread, we keep a consistent size to our stitches by counting threads. When we think about cross stitch and you're stitching on Aida, then each cross stitch is covering one Aida square on the fabric. When you're doing a typical cross stitch on even weave or linen, then your typical stitch is 2 threads wide and 2 threads high. Now, before you say anything, yes, you can stitch over one on linen and on even weave, in which case each stitch is covering just 1 thread wide and 1 thread high. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I am going to be working on linen. I frankly don't remember what the count is. This is just for my stash. I'm guessing it's probably a 28 count. And I'm going to be stitching with 2 strands of floss, since that's typically what cross stitchers use. Now, these stitches can be done with a single strand. They can be done with flower thread. They can be done with silk. They can be done with any kind of a thread. So let's get started. So the first herringbone stitch I'm going to do here is going to actually be 4 threads high and 4 threads wide, which is going to sound awfully big to cross stitchers. And like your typical cross stitch, I need to fix my camera. Hold on a second here. So I'm going to start next to a vertical thread simply because that's just my method of keeping track of keeping my stitches even. And I am starting with a loop method, so you can see my loop on the back. And I'm going to make my first stitch 4 threads wide and 4 threads high. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and going up 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoops, I lost my place here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And before I go any further, yes, I am counting threads, not holes. Don't even get me started on the topic of counting holes. That is just, okay, let me just go ahead and address that right now. When you count holes rather than threads, each set of 2 threads has a hole before it, in the middle, and on the other side. So is that 3 holes or is it 2 holes? But if we're counting threads, we know it's 2 threads. We don't wonder, are we counting the hole we're starting in, plus the hole we're skipping, and then the hole that we're going to? And that just causes all kinds of confusion. And I can tell you from my years of teaching, as soon as you start talking about counting holes, somebody in the class will say, okay, are we counting the one we're starting in? And somebody else will say, oh no, you don't count that one, you just count the next ones. Forget that. Count threads, not holes. Okay, lecture's over. All right, so finishing the stitch, I'm going to go ahead and pull it through to the back and catch my loop. Now, there are lots of other ways you can start. The loop start's not the only one, but it does work for this. And do make sure that you keep it kind of snug. Okay, so my next stitch is going to be 2 threads to the left of where I just finished. So I'm coming over 2 threads. And then down here, the easiest way for me to count, and let me come in a little closer, is to start here and count over 2 more threads. So you can see I'm 4 threads from my beginning point, and come down 1, 2, 3, 4 threads. Now, since I'm choosing to stitch with 2 floss strands, I do need to make sure that I'm keeping them parallel to each other. Okay, so then the next stitch, I'm going to come 2 threads to the left of that where I just finished. And then up here, I can count from here 1, 2, 3, 4. And then come in right here. And so you can see how each leg is crossing the previous leg. Now, poking and pulling works, but there is a much easier way of doing this, and that's a sewing motion. So remember, when you sew, you're ending one stitch and beginning the next stitch in the same motion. When I stitch the herringbone stitch as a sewing motion, from my last stitch up here, I'm going to come ahead 1, 2, 3, 4 threads, scoop up those 2 threads on my needle, and notice my needle is pointing to the left. And then I'm going to come down here, and from this stitch, come over to 4 threads, scoop up 2 threads, and again, my needle is pointing to the left. And so you get this nice rhythm, always checking to make sure that your threads are parallel to each other. Then I'm going to come ahead 4 and scoop up 2. Come ahead 4, scoop up 2. And so it's just a nice rhythm to it, and it's quick and easy. So this is just a very traditional herringbone stitch. That the row is 4 threads high, and each stitch is 4 threads wide. Now let's take a look at the back. So on the back, other than where I started here, you have a series of like dotted lines. So that's what a herringbone stitch looks like on the back. And every version of a herringbone stitch will look like that. And when I talk about other versions, let me show you other configurations. Actually, before I go on, let me show you how you end any one of the herringbone stitches. And again, do make sure that you straighten out your 2 strands before you go any further. So again, this next one to end this row would go 1, 2, 3, 4 threads up. Okay, so on the back, I'm going to simply go back and forth between these sort of dotted lines. For this next herringbone variation, I'm going to start a different way. I'm going to start with an away waist knot. And that's when you deliberately put a knot in the end of your thread. And I'm going to put it away from where I'm going to be stitching. And I'm not going to think about it again until I'm ready to bury my starting thread. Now, I'm going to make this next, I'm going to consider this like my border. So I'm just going to leave a couple of unworked threads between these 2 rows of herringbone stitches. And this one's going to be 6 threads high. So I'm going to come down 2, 4, 5, 6 threads. But I'm not going to make this one 6 threads wide. Instead, I'm just going to make it 4 threads wide, just like this one. So again, it'll be taller, but the same width. So from here, I want to come over 2, 3, 4 threads, and then come up 6. So 2, 4, 6. And just like I did before, I'm going to scoop up 2 threads. Keep my floss strands parallel. Now, I want this stitch to be 4 threads wide, but 6 threads high. So from here, I'm going to count over 2, 4, and come down 6. So 2, 4, 6, which should put me right next to or on the same channel as my first stitch. So again, up here, I'm going to skip 2, come ahead 2, grab 2. From here, coming ahead 2, 4, picking up 2, come back up here, come ahead 2, 4, scoop up 2. So you can see where the stitch is executed in the same way. What's different is the count. So again, this one is going to appear taller and skinnier, and my threads have gotten uneven here. So not only do we want to keep them parallel, but we want to keep them flush with each other. So again, from up here, coming ahead 2, 4, scooping up 2, and continuing. So you can see how different the 2 rows look from each other. And again, they're both herringbone stitches. I mean, there's not a different name for them. It's just a different count. So the purple row, I would call that 4 by 4. This one is 6 by 4. And again, I would end it in the same manner. So on the back, again, we've got these 2 rows of kind of dotted lines, and I'm just going to wind my way back and forth between them. Now, I'm not going the same way each time, because if I did, it's more of a whip stitch, and you'll have a little bit of a ridge. This is the best way to keep the stitches flat. So this is my stitching thread. That's my ending thread. So we're going to cut that off. And again, what I call dangerously close. Probably leave a little bit more with the herringbone stitch than normal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut the knot off of our away waist knot. So there's my little away waist knot. I'm going to cut this off. And I have a feeling I probably made this too short. So this was my beginning thread. And what I'm going to do now is very carefully thread this into my needle. And when I said I didn't leave it long enough, I probably should have made this about twice that length. So when you do an away waist knot, do make sure that you put that away knot far enough away that you're leaving yourself enough thread to easily then secure the beginning tail. And I'm probably going to manage with this, but I would be a little bit more comfortable with a little bit more thread. So that's the benefit of an away waist knot. I think especially when you're learning a stitch, it's nice to not have to worry about the tail, about how it's secure, and you just do it after the fact. Okay, so that's 2 variations of the herringbone stitch. Now let's look at another one. I'm having fun with these colors. These are the colors that I have handy because they're the ones I'm using for the both the scissor fob and the sampler that I'm designing for the summer cruise. And I am super, super excited about it. I have a little bit more of the design done, not quite finished it, and my working title is 2 Turtles and a Parrot. And I might add it as a postscript to this. We'll see. But I'll be sharing that in my Facebook group. Okay, so we have 4x4. We have 4x6. What if I did 6x4? What if the row was only 4 threads high like this one, but the stitches were 6 threads wide? So then it would look something like this. I'm going to leave my 2 threads unworked and come down 4 threads. Now this row, again, is going to be 4 threads high, but it's going to be 6 threads wide. So from here, I'm counting over 2, 4, 6, and up 2, 4. Scoop up 2. Again, the process is the same. It's just the count that's different. So counting from back here, I've got 2, 4, 6, and then come down 2, 4. Again, this is still a herringbone stitch. And my floss strands are twisted there. So if I want to count from here, I have to count ahead 8 threads. So 2, 4, 6, 8, scoop up 2. If I want to count from here, count ahead 2, 4, 6, 8, skip up 2, scoop up 2. So again, this stitch right here that I just made is 4 threads high, and it's 2, 4, 6 threads wide. So I'm going to do a little bit more of this one. So 2, 4, 6, 8, skip up 2. I keep saying skip, scoop up 2. Keep your threads parallel and your tension even. So 2, 4, 6, 8, scoop up 2. So again, you can see how different the herringbone stitch looks. This one appears to be much more open, and the count is just the reverse of this one. So the herringbone stitch, regardless of the stitch count, is done the same. What's going to be different is how it's going to look based on how high and wide each one of the stitches are. Now, how can you put this stitch to use if the original chart doesn't call for it? If you're doing a sampler and it has a very simple cross stitch inner border between, say, alphabets or motifs or whatever, then you can easily put the herringbone stitch in the same height. So if, for example, the chart is sort of a checkerboard of like a cross stitch here and here and here and here and here, back and forth, you can very easily substitute a herringbone stitch for that. But even if it's a little bit more elaborate border, just keep the integrity of the design intact, then you want to make sure the overall height of the herringbone row is the same, and then you can vary the width of the stitch to get the look that you want. You can also do multiple trip herringbone stitches, which I've also used on a couple of my designs. For example, with this purple one, could become a 2-trip herringbone by making your next stitch start here and come down. Well, let me just do it instead of just talking about it. If I start up here and come down here and scoop up these 2 threads, and then come up here and scoop up these 2. Well, it's just not going to cooperate, is it? And then come down here, scoop up these 2. And just continue on across. So you can get all kinds of really cool color combinations this way. You could do, like I say, a light and a dark of the same color, or like in this case where I'm using 2 completely different colors. So you can just see how cool that looks. So that's a 2-trip herringbone. Back here on this one, we could do a 2-trip herringbone, and the second trip would be picking up the middle 2 threads between in each one of these gaps. But since there are 3 sets of 2 between here, in other words, there's 6 threads. Remember, this is my first trip. My second trip could come along and pick up these 2 threads, and then these 2 threads, the ones right next to the light turquoise. And then the third trip could pick up the middle ones, and then the fourth trip pick up the last one. So there's just all kinds of magical things that you can do with a herringbone stitch. So I hope that this will inspire you to find ways that you can put the herringbone stitch to use in your own work. It's one of my favorite stitches. When I started thinking about this floss tube episode, being that today is Final Four basketball, I knew that I was not going to spend a whole lot of time making the video and doing the edit. So I will apologize in advance and hope that you don't feel like you're being cut short. But being that I live in North Carolina, and both North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is playing, as well as Duke, I have 2 reasons to be really excited about basketball this afternoon and evening and tonight. Well, I guess depending on what time zone you live in. For us, late afternoon into the evening. So, not to shortchange the other 2 teams that are in the Final Four, but hey, I'm a North Carolinian, so I say that without any apology. Okay, so in amongst everything else, I'm just about all packed up for my trip up to Hobby House. I actually leave on Monday next week, and I'm going about halfway, driving up to Northern Virginia, spend some time with 2 of my sisters, and then I'll go the rest of the way up to upstate New York for my first trip to Hobby House Needleworks. I am so excited. I don't know whether I am more excited about going to Hobby House Needleworks or that I'm going up there to teach. Right now, I'd say they're about even. Being invited to come up there and teach has certainly been a highlight, but it's a thinly veiled excuse to come and visit the store. So I do plan on doing a shop visit video, and you can look forward to that. Can't promise it'll be next week. We'll see. Right now is kind of a crazy time between preparing to travel and the driving time, spending some quality time with my sisters, spending lots of quality time up at Hobby House. I just don't know what my schedule is going to be like for the next couple of weeks. But wherever I am, you're not going to be far from my thoughts. And I hope that wherever you are, that you stitch happy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.